Large. Stop talking about the 99 large.
Less commission.
Well, that WIT company probably is making good money. Maybe they're doing it everywhere, saying, hey, we'll manage this money.
Sure.
Give us 1%.
You didn't want to have a special meeting this week to do the capital next Wednesday.
We could.
That'll be finance day for you guys, the audit plus the or the quarterly.
Yeah.
Well, then we have to keep our coronavirus discussion short.
Yes, please.
Good luck with that.
That
Right.
would be unique.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like, maybe we start with the CAFR then. Because if we could at least start with the CAFR, that could at least control.
That'd be nice
Not
to
in
be
a
outside
phase change
auditors,
week,
since
we
it's
could
working
go a
out,
week without that.
If we could do that.
Yeah. Without the COVID? No way.
But I don't need to hear how.
It's the hottest topic around, man. We gotta talk about it.
We talked about it for 3 hours.
I know how to work
That's
my
okay.
hands. We can.
And we get paid to talk, and we get paid to give as much time as needed. So.
By the word.
What?
Jim gets paid by the word.
We
That's
get,
why-
we get, yeah, no, we get paid
You
to.
got more than 99 large if you get
Tony,
paid
we're
for
good?
the work.
Ready? Ready to go? All right, very good.
To start.
Okay, we are starting.
He's not laughing. I am.
I'm saying I don't care if it takes all day.
We digress. Commissioners, good afternoon. We're going to kick off the discussion of the 2021 budget comments. I think Commissioner Cruz will be here shortly. We are streaming this, and we are live, so just FYI on that, your microphones are on. In a normal budget year, we start discussing budget in November and December as a staff. The departments meet, they begin to have discussion about things they can do better, things they can, maybe are priorities, things that are less priorities, and they start to have that earnest discussion with their staff. In February, in a normal year, we have a retreat with the commission, which we did this year, and everything was normal and looking pretty good. And then March comes and the bottom drops out, basically, and we've had to divert all of our attention, and it has created a very unusual year for us and a very unusual budget year. Normally, by the time we come to you in this setting, we have already been through and vetted all of the department's budget at the management staff level. We have not done that this year because management staff has been full bore on COVID. So normally I like to tell you that I bring you a 90 to 95% budget done. I can't necessarily make that claim this year. We will go through this process together. What you are hearing today from departments, a lot of the senior staff will be hearing for the first time because we've all been diverted in attention. But it is important that this process happen, that you as representatives of the people hear the budget, at least on first blush. We will then, after we go through this week of sessions, we will take it and massage it and manicure it and bring it back to you again in June. And we will then have our public meetings where we allow citizens to comment on our budgeting process. So we hope to, from this point forward, have as normal a budget process as we can. Fortunately, in Sedgwick County, we have a AAA credit history and rating. We are well positioned financially, and we have a history of managing through tough times and doing what we have to do and coming out on the other side with success. We did it most recently about a decade ago with the recession, and we worked through the crisis together with the commission, and we came out. We're going to have to do the same thing with COVID. The 2021 budget, I will make some preliminary comments. First of all, we are working with a very limited amount of data in a radically changing times where we cannot rely on trends and historical data as we historically have been able to do because it is so rapidly changing and evolving. The leadership team has already moved on some 2021 budget issues which are significant because we know that with revenues heading the way they are and the environment the way it is, that this was going to not be a choice. So we have already cut almost all decision packages that departments had submitted through their work in November, December, January, February. We have saved a few that are business operational important, And in fact, the decision package topic in and of itself is so important, we're actually going to bring that back to you for a separate discussion in this room publicly. We have eliminated the targeted wage adjustment plan for this year, which is a 1.25% wage increase for employees that were severely underpaid. We have cut that this year. We just don't see where we're going to have the room to be able to do that. And we are also recommending in 2021 that we have no wage increases for employees, 0. We have reduced all travel, training, membership, and subscriptions this year, and we're recommending that that carry forward to next year. And we have reduced software additions this year and are recommending that that be recommended for next year as well. So we've already gone in and done some fairly large surgery on not only the 20 budget, but the 2021 budget. We still aspire to have a flat budget. And normally, when we roll this forward, we like to have our budget set. We like to stick to it. But this year, I'm going to have to ask you that we will be able to monitor it and bring it back for course corrections to you as the dynamics change. And that's an unusual ask. But in this environment, I see no other way to be fiscally responsible and accountable in a budget year such as this. So we will ask that we have the ability to come back to you to course correct, not only as this year goes along, but as next year goes along as well. So with that, I turn it over to Lindsay. She will take us through the forecast, and we will get started with departmental presentations.
Thank you, Tom. All right, hello again, Commissioners. So, before we get into the details, I want to say a special thank you to Finance, and particularly for this presentation to the Budget Office. They have done a ton of work, led by Lorian, to come up with a forecast in a time where there is just no data and things are happening around us, and we know there's going to be an impact, but it is awfully hard to understand what that will be at this stage of the game. So they have done a great job, and my thanks to them. So this is the budget kickoff. Typically, we do just kind of a brief update from where we were in February when you last saw that. Unfortunately, this time we're going to get a little more into the details because I think it's necessary for you to understand what our baseline assumptions are at this time. And as Tom said, we're going to have to course correct not just budget but forecast as we go forward. We have engaged the Center for Economic Development and Business Research to do some revenue projection models for us, some different scenarios, and we hope to have that soon. And as soon as we get that, we'll present that to you. And if you would be so patient with us, we may need to update the forecast as we go along, which is also a little bit different than how we would typically do our business. So you do have 2 handouts at your seats. You should have this presentation, and then you have our favorite document, right, the long sheet, with all of the assumptions. So we're just going to kind of methodically work our way through. If you have questions, we will pause me, and we will be happy to talk through those. So now more so than ever, it's important to understand the distinction between the forecast and the budget, right? The budget is a maximum spending limit you all are required to adopt each year. The forecast is a tool that tells us what we really think will happen, not just for the current year, but 5 years into the future. And we have shown you in the past what you saw in February 2011, or what the commission then saw, that kind of told us how bad the impact of the recession was going to be on the county and showed some insolvency and some things like that. And so that is precisely what this tool will help us with as we move through this process, as we get data and we can kind of see what everything looks like. So the handout that you have, I'm not going to go into the details yet. We're going to work through that through the presentation. But it shows you key revenue and assumptions up at the top. It has a 2019 actual starting figure, which is the baseline. What you show, or what you see in the 2020 column, would be the growth or loss as compared to that 2019 figure. And then as it works across, likewise, it's the prior year is the baseline for that percentage. Then you can see kind of the second section here with expenditures, the same type of thing. We do have some additional detail here in terms of dollars, because percentages aren't necessarily going to give you great context when it comes to things like zoo funding or TRB. The middle section is kind of the bottom line. What is the activity happening in each of our funds for a given year? The next section below that then shows the impact on the overall fund balance for a fund. And to the right, the far right, you do see county finance targeted fund balances. And so in the general fund, you'll see we don't have a target fund balance. All the other funds do. And so when you may see deficits except in the general fund, those are intentional. Yes, sir.
How are the targeted funds balanced?
So.
Is that by policy or is that by?
It is not by policy. So the commission did historically have a policy that set minimum balances for each fund. That was a tax fund, but after some GASB changes back 10-ish years ago, only the general fund now has a minimum requirement. And so what we did to compute these was basically look at the type of revenue streams coming into that fund, the fund's level activity, its predictability, and we basically set a rate based on those moving parts about what we thought was fiscally responsible. And then anything that is shifted, of course, goes to the fund that needs it, as there may be spikes. If EMS needs equipment or something, we may shift that mill levy around to generate the dollars there.
This is you and finance.
Right,
with
this
their
is-
best,
Right,
obviously, probably conservative and everything else. Okay.
right. And that's why we try to be very clear about what those targets are, so that if the commission does want to take policy action, we're welcome, or we're happy to try and meet
Not
those
interested as much
expectations.
as I just want to know where it came from.
Sure,
Thank you.
that's very fair. So the next section is mill levy rates, and I would encourage you at this stage of the game maybe not to get too caught up on those specific mill levy rates. This is just simply an exercise that we do at this time of year. The most important measure, of course, is the total mill levy rate at the bottom, and you'll see that it is consistent with the resolution that the commission adopted back in 2016, where we do have that mill levy rate reduction planned in 2023. Then the final section of this form shows you the 2020 adopted budget. So that is the last formal action this commission has taken on CIP. What you will see next Tuesday on the 12th is a recommended CIP that looks different than this. And so at that time, you will also see what the impact would be on the forecast if we take those recommended actions versus what you all adopted in 2020. But this is a good starting point. So I also think it's important, not just for you all, but for the folks listening to this, when we talk about the financial forecast, we focus on the 8 funds in the county that are supported with property tax dollars. Doesn't mean they're fully funded that way, but there's some property tax dollar flowing in there. And so these 8 funds are what we'll look at. So what's included in the forecast today are current programs and services, what you all authorized to be done in the 2020 adopted budget, and then any changes you've made since then. What you also will see in today's presentation is, again, what we think we can expect to see. We have gone month by month through data collections and made an estimate for each of our types of revenues to say what we think is going to happen. And we think it's fairly realistic. But again, we are data poor right now, and we recognize that, and that's why we're asking for your flexibility. Also, to the extent that Thomas talked about the expense adjustments that he referenced, things that have been put on pause, the shift to essential spending only, that has been reflected in the forecast that you'll see. Again, the 2020 adopted budget is included because that 2020 adopted budget only had a CIP through 2024. We've just plugged in $2 million of cash for 2025. That's consistent with what you saw in February. There's also additional uses of cash throughout this. You all probably recall that last year we moved to a 5-year radio replacement plan. That continues to be reflected in this forecast. We have $2 million each year for 2020 and 2021 for the zoo administrative building. That work is simply too far down the road for that to turn back. The old space has been demolished and they're constructing new. There also is an additional $3 million for CAD, RMS, JMS. If you recall, the commission had approved $2 million for that project already, so this rounds out that total to $5 million. We also have the Technology Review Board. Now, Tom talked about we did shift some expenses out of 2021 into future years, but those are still needs that we believe are there, and so you'll see on the long sheet when we get to that section how those dollars now look across the future. And then we do know in 2022, we will have a 27th pay period. Normally, we only have 26. Unfortunately, it's just the way it works out. It's not like we only have 25 the next year. I wish it was that simple, but it's not. So it's just the way it falls out every 11 years. So what is not included, Tom already talked about, there's no decision packages, there's no enhancements, unless it's just simply a cost of doing business, like the health department coming online, that building coming on under our purview, or increases in utilities or commodity costs, those are plugged in. We do not have unbudgeted community development and economic development asks. So to the extent it is included in the 2020 budget today, it continues to be reflected throughout. This isn't the recommended budget, so there's still plenty of time to have that discussion, but I just want you to understand that's the baseline we're working off of for this forecast. We do not yet know any costs or what the timeline is for Odyssey implementation, but we know the state's still interested in pursuing that. But we don't know that, so that's not in the forecast yet. And then to the same type of theme, we don't know what we don't know about technology, but we know it's changing constantly, and so to the extent there are those things out there that we don't know about, it's not in the forecast yet. So we're going to break the presentation up a little differently than we normally do. We're going to look at 5 years revenues, then we're going to shift to 5 years expenses, and then we're going to look at the total impact when we bring the two together, because I think that flows and makes more sense relative to the long sheet. So what everybody wants to know, what does 2020 look like with COVID? These are our revenue estimates. So I want to remind everybody that in January of 2020, we knew about the Spirit layoffs. So we had already estimated some impact on revenue projections at that time. So what I'm showing you now is an even greater impact due to COVID. So property taxes, we actually had estimated a pretty high delinquency rate because of the Spirit. And based on what, fortunately, the Treasurer's Office shares data with us each day on what's come in their lockbox for tax collections, and those are actually maintaining, they're pretty good, on track and above over last year. So we actually are not seeing the type or severity of delinquency we had projected back in January, and so we've actually increased our property tax collection estimate by $400,000, which only equates to about 0.3%. Retail sales taxes is going to be one of the biggest hits for us because we do know that a lot of non-essential businesses were closed for a month, month and a half, and will continue to have some restrictions on where people are going and how they're spending their dollars. And so we have a 12.4% estimated impact this year versus our prior estimate, which is about $4 million less in terms of collections. Motor vehicle taxes are about 17% less than what we thought they would be, again, and we had lower estimates at that time. But it's simply because we don't expect people to be going out and buying cars right now. Consumer confidence isn't great, and so we don't expect that they're spending a lot on that. Now, prisoner housing, on the flip side of having a lesser population at the jail, that's great, but that also means we bring in lesser prisoner housing fees. And so that's estimated at about $794,000. Officer fees are the per-page recording fees for mortgages. And actually, stunningly enough, those numbers are up through April. We don't necessarily expect it to stay that way. I don't know if people are refinancing maybe mortgages and taking advantage of interest rates. But we haven't yet seen a tremendous impact, so we're only estimating about a $400,000 hit there. Gaming revenues, we know the casino was closed. And so that'll reopen, but we don't know yet how people will react to being able to go, if they'll be comfortable. And so we do estimate about a 25% hit there, or about $500,000. Special city-county highway is gas tax. A lot of that is based on just sheer gallons consumed, not necessarily the price of gas, but we know people are driving a lot because they were staying at home. And so we expect about a $500,000 hit there. Investment income we already knew was going to go down. We talked about that a lot over the last 6 months, that the Fed was decreasing interest rates and all of that. But we have further reduced our estimates for investment income as we have these gaps of cash coming in if people are delinquent, paying later, or if we don't have the cash flow we expect. So we've had a slightly greater hit to investment income there. And then finally, we have already seen through April a hit to MABCD charges for service. And so we expect that to continue through the end of the year. So then, looking at 2021, I want to...
Is this all broken down? Like the MABCD charges for service, is that broken down by what charge?
We can get that for you. It's
Okay.
not in the forecast, but we can certainly look into that and get that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, looking at 2021 revenue assumptions, again, this is off of these lowered 2020 estimates. So when you see growth, it may look strong, but it's only strong as compared to 2020 activity. So we'll get into those individual details and you'll see what I mean when we get to charts later in this presentation. So we do know that January 1st was the baseline for the tax maybe not the tax rate, the value of homes. And so that's already set. We do expect assessed value to be up about 3.75%, maybe even more. But again, under the property tax lid, we wouldn't expect to be able to take advantage of any growth there. And so we are assuming that 3.75% to fund the 2021 budget. Retail sales taxes, we expect to increase 4% over this current year. That's not a tremendous increase because we know that for a month and a half, at least a month and a half, we had a depressed situation where people weren't buying things. So hopefully we'll be wrong on that, but that's our estimate today. Motor vehicle taxes, we estimate would remain flat with 2020. Medical charges for service, this assumes normal transport growth of about 3%. Officer fee increases, again, as maybe the economy starts to pick up, people start selling houses, we expect to see an increase there. But again, it's not tremendous. It's basically putting us back where we were. And then finally, we expect special city, county, highway funds to go back. We expect people to be driving next year. And so we expect that to go to a more normal rate. So then looking at the final years of the forecast, we do expect to start to see the impact of COVID-19 and consumer confidence in later assessed value years, where maybe we don't see the same type of growth in market rates for homes. So we do plan to see 2.5% in 2022, only 1.5% in 2023, and then maybe a bounce back to more typical growth that we've seen the last couple of years, 3.5% in 24 and 4% in 25. The mill levy rate, again, as we already discussed, is included at what was included in the 2016 target mill levy rate resolution. We expect more normal growth of sales taxes at about 2.7% in the outer years. Motor vehicle tax growth of about 2% per year in those outer years, again, to reflect car purchases. More typical rates of medical service charge growth related to EMS transport growth per year, and then a more typical growth rate in special city, county, highway of about 1% per year. So looking at all of these on one slide, here's what we show assessed value we think will look like. It's got 2 years of actuals, and then what we project it will look like into the future. Local retail sales and use tax, I said I would follow back up on this and say this is what I mean, this is what I mean. While 4% growth sounds great, it's still not going to get us back to where we think we were. We think it's going to take people a while to get those income streams steadied. We know we've had layoffs in the community, and so we just don't expect to see quite the same level of spending that we've seen the last few years as everything has really improved for us. Motor vehicle taxes. People are going to need to replace cars at some point. That's just a simple fact of the matter. And so we are estimating a closer return to normal rates of growth, but maybe not the same type of growth we would have seen before COVID-19's impact. Officer fees, we do expect that to get back to normal fairly quickly. People selling homes, but again, maybe not at those same high market rates that we've seen recently. Licenses and permits, the same type of logic here with officer fees. This is primarily MABCD that drives this, and so you can see we expect a fairly significant hit this year and then a return to more typical years fairly quickly. Medical charges for service, we've already talked about this with EMS. We do expect those transports to look, that growth to look pretty normal in the future as we return back to closer to our daily life. Investment income, you can see 2020, we do expect a hit from not having as much cash available, from having those deferred flow-ins of revenue. We also know we're able to invest the CARES Act, but we don't quite know how that will, what the restrictions are going to be. We got some guidance yesterday that makes it look at like maybe it's not going to be available for general use like we thought, and so we may need to tweak this one as we go forward. Special city, county, highway, again, this is based primarily on gallons consumed, not necessarily the cost of gas, and so we do expect people to start driving again. Hopefully the stay-at-home order was something we don't have to repeat. So that summarizes revenues. Moving then to expenditures, we'll take the same kind of tack. We'll look at 2020, then 2021, and then future years, but this will move a little more quickly. So Tom explained that we have already made some adjustments to the 2020 budget to try and take action based on the revenue shortfall we're expecting. The 1.25% targeted adjustment pool for employees that was going to be phased in based on the results of the WSU compensation study has essentially been tabled. We know that there's still needs there, but we're just simply not really in the position to be able to do that, especially if the goal is to avoid layoffs. So that saves about $1.6 million in your county property tax supported funds. Again, because the sheriff has fewer inmates, we expect to see somewhat of a decrease in meals and medical, not sustained, but for a kind of a one-time savings. We expect that to be maybe around $525,000. The fleet charges, we don't necessarily expect people not to pay their set-aside, but we do expect them to pay less for the fuel that they're driving, which is the other half of fleet charges. And so right now, we're estimating savings of $65,000. We may yet see that savings be even more as these costs stay flat for longer. Tom said we've already reduced some of that non-essential spending, travel, training, memberships, and subscriptions, and so we have already counted on departments doing that for 2020 to the total tune of about $560,000. We know some training is necessary to maintain certifications and professional licenses, so we haven't cut out everything, but this is about, I think, a third or a half of the total expense that we saw for 2020, or for 2019, repeated in 2020. And then again, IT has really stepped up to the plate about trying to figure out opportunities for things that we can try and extend life on. And so that's about $360,000 of savings this year. Those costs will have to be paid at some point, but hopefully we can defer that a little bit with minimal expense to the organization. So for 2021, unfortunately, we have removed the recommendation to have an employee pay pool next year. Again, that doesn't help us get any further ahead, but hopefully with the not hopefully, but everyone I think is going to be experiencing the same type of thing. There's not going to be really anybody who's got strong wage growth. And so hopefully that won't hurt us anymore. The employer portion of health insurance is going up. We plan about 5%. We are hearing preliminarily that it may not be that much. And we actually may be able to have some savings and avoid passing along any increase to employees too. And so as we move through the process, you'll hear more about that. We do have cash for the third year of Phase 1 Zoo, the admin building there. And again, that project's just too far along. And so we're going to honor that commitment, or plan to honor that commitment. Technology Review Board is down to $130,000 in 2021. Those costs have shifted out into future years. And so that has done a lot to mitigate the impact of TRB on our financial forecast for next year. We have $0.9 million in the forecast for radio replacements next year. I believe all in the sheriff's office. And then we have, again, the 2020 adopted budget that has cash for capital projects, $1.3 million on the facility side, and $10.7 million for road and bridge. I'll remind you that road and bridge, half of that sales tax money that we get is dedicated to that, so that's the cash you see here. It's not general fund cash, and it's not available for any other use at this time. So we do have pay pools back in the outer years. So we have 2.5% in 2022, which is the same year. We have that 27th pay period, so personnel will look large in that year. And then 4% in 23 through 25, hopefully to start making up some ground on where we stand on market pay. We also know that there are employee health cost increase every year. We're going to do everything we can to manage that, but hopefully keep that to 5%. We do know that we have 2022 and 2024 elections that need to be planned for, so that's included in the forecast. If you recall, we had $3 million to try and do some strategic plan initiatives to try to implement those things over the years. That has been removed for now. And hopefully if our financial situation isn't quite so dire, maybe we can start to try and address some of those higher priority items. We do have the 2020 adopted CIP and that $2 million in cash in 2025. We have the radio replacement, finalization of that 5-year plan. And then you can see what the amounts are for Technology Review Board, and you can see that higher amount in 2022 than what you had seen before, because we have shifted those costs out of 21 and into 22, hoping that we're a little bit closer to normal by then. So again, looking at personnel, you can see that big jump in 2022. That is, again, because of the 27th pay period, which is $5 million on its own, along with a pay pool. And then you can see those gradual increases in the outer years due to the other pay pools and some of the other benefit adjustments we've talked about. Contractuals, you can see those reductions in 2020. We carried those forward into 2021, but there are other costs that come into play in incremental increases for utilities and things like that. Commodities, you can see the spike in 2020 with reductions in outer years. And we can get into those details if you're interested, but in the interest of time, I might start moving along a little quicker. You can see our planned debt service associated with what was in the 2020 adopted CIP. You can see equipment expenditures and how that changes based on the radio replacement schedule that we talked through. And then, of course, we transfer cash out of property tax funds into a number of other funds, internal service funds and grants. And so you can see what that looks like. So what's the bottom line? What's the impact? Here's where the rubber meets the road. So on this slide, you can see revenues and expenditures. Expenditures are in blue and revenues are in red. And so you can see our biggest gaps there are in 2020 and 2022. And so when we compare revenues to expenses, you see what's on slide 31. Slide 31 shows you the actual operating income, and that correlates to what's on your long sheet. So you can see for 2020, with the revenue shortfalls we outlined, even with the expense adjustments we've discussed, we still expect across our 8 property tax supported funds to have a deficit of about $7.1 million. But I want to draw your attention to the long sheet because I talked about it earlier, but I think it's important that we focus on the general fund only. Those other funds have strategic drawdowns that we're trying to do, we want to do to get to a prudent fund balance level. And so the general fund is where some of that heat comes into play. And so looking at the general fund, that gives us in 2020 approximately a $5.4 million anticipated deficit this year. Now, it's unfortunate you didn't get to hear the audit presentation this morning because you would have seen a lovely slide that Hope prepared that showed you that as of the end of 2019, we had excess fund balance in the general fund of roughly $16 million. And so what that means is the commission has the ability to use that $16 million in ways that are outlined in your fund balance policy. This type of circumstance to basically get some good data and then make some strategic decisions going forward. When we went through the downturn, it happened in the fall of 2008. We didn't start to really feel the impacts until 2010. There were mid-year budget corrections in 2010. And then in 2011 and 2012, as the next year's budgets were being adopted, it was done in kind of a two-phased approach. Now, I will tell you the difference between the projections we're seeing today versus then is then they were projecting insolvency, definitely falling below the general fund balance. We don't see that right now in this scenario. It doesn't mean it can't happen. We're just data poor right now and we don't know. So while $5.4 million is alarming for anyone, I think we are very well positioned as a county, thanks to a history of good financial management, to be able to survive that and to give you all time to make deliberate and thoughtful decisions about how the future of the county needs to look. So speaking then about, yes, sir.
So your forecasts and these projections and these charts, you're assuming all this hit is because of you already plugged in the MAC,
Right,
the
737 max.
and now you're replugging in the effect of the
COVID.
COVID.
Yes, sir.
So how long are you predicting the COVID? Are these nationwide data you're getting in the finance that says, are you saying the third quarter we're kind of coming back a little bit, or what?
So I cannot begin to tell you how much data we are looking at in finance. Everything from the consensus revenue estimating group to just today we're looking at Congressional Budget Office to, what Standard & Poor's and Fitch Ratings and NACO and everybody is putting out, Government Finance Officers Association. And so what you'll see is that we do expect some of the short-term stuff to bounce back, but we don't expect sales tax to bounce back. We do expect to see an impact on the housing market and to have that be a little more into the future. So that's why I'm saying, I think this is relatively realistic because it gives us 2 or 3 years to maybe get back to where we're really truly gaining some momentum.
So I would like to be comfortable that your projections are not just from you all sitting around on the chalkboard. You're getting a lot of information. to
We
say
are.
This is what we think.
But I will
Impacts
tell
us.
you, Center for Economic Development and Business Research is getting us those revenue models, and as soon as we get that, we'll communicate that to you all, and if we need to make some adjustments here, we will. And I think that's why Tom's point about trying to do course correction
Right, okay.
is so important, because we are data poor and we know it, and we're doing the best we can with the information we've got today, but we know we don't have a lot of it.
Okay.
And so I just want to make sure you all are crystal clear on that. We're doing the best we can, we think it's reasonable. But we'll come back to you as we have data for sure. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
Can you name off all those places again?
Which places? All the ones we're
places
looking
you're
at
getting
data?
from?
I think we started talking about the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, which is the governor's, that Kansas group, Congressional Budget Office, GFOA, NACO. Who else did I mention?
There were like 2 others.
Yeah.
You just rattled them off. I can go back. I just think it's kind of.
Give me a second, it'll come
No,
back to me. Now
no.
that I'm on the spot, I can't think of
can
which
find
ones
them.
I said.
You just rattled them off. It's good. Thank you.
No problem. So, okay. So, speaking about the general fund, and again, what we were looking at after 2008 versus where we are today, when the commission was looking in February 2011, they saw insolvency issues. We aren't even projecting to fall below the 20% minimum balance in the general fund, even with a $5 million operating deficit in this year, based on those revenue shortfalls, even with an $8 million deficit in 2022, largely driven because of that 27th payroll period, which even in a good year, we wouldn't necessarily encourage you to make reductions to balance something that was simply a timing fluke, and would recover itself in the next year. So I think where we stand today, certainly, I don't want to say don't panic. I don't want you to panic. I want you to be concerned. But we are, as a AAA credit-rated entity, we are in a good spot. We are in an enviable spot relative to a lot of local governments. And particularly if we can get some revenue shortfall assistance through the federal government, we could be okay, and really have some time to think through what are the right course corrections to do here. So, taking everything in the aggregate, if we look at all 8 property tax supported funds, again, you can see we expect to end 2025 with $60.2 million amongst the 8 cumulative property tax supported funds. Again, not that we're not concerned, but I think you all are in a good position to come at this strategically. So this is not the recommended budget. This is simply the kickoff. You will be hearing lots and lots of information over the next week. Requests from departments, what a flat budget means for them at a high level. We have asked every department to tell us what a 3% reduction would look like to services and departments, so that if we get to that point, you all at least have some context for what that would look like. You will see that there aren't that many budget adjustments. You're going to see a really flat budget in your binders. And that's okay for now. That would be a great position to be in if we can sustain that. So pre-COVID, you'd heard how we need compensation adjustments, strategic plan initiatives that we were going to pursue. We had a lot of technology needs and space needs we were talking through. And before COVID really hit and everybody was putting in their decision packages, we had more than 80 decision packages totaling almost $19 million for 64 additional positions. So that is the type of need that departments believe is out there that we're just simply not in a position to do much about right now. So after COVID hit us, we know there are still those needs, but some stuff's just going to have to be tabled. Again, it's about trying to provide and continue the level of service we can provide today. So pause for 2021 personnel adjustments, strategic plan initiatives, non-urgent technology review board. The administration building you'll see has been pushed off in the recommended CIP. You'll see that there aren't a lot of program enhancements, and then the vast majority of decision packages, as Tom said, have been tabled. So you'll see 21 2021 budget request totaling $456.3 million. If you look at the budget summaries tab in your book, you'll see that is darn flat compared with 2020 revised budget. And then you'll see and hear about what 3% budget reductions would look like. And when we look at all property tax supported funds, including the fire district, that equates to about $8.4 million of spending. So we kick off the hearings today. You have several presentations. June 17th is the drop dead day for decisions to go into the county manager's recommended budget book. So that budget has enough time to get all of that plugged in, get the numbers figured, and get everything to print in time. Tom will present that to you on July 15th. That'll also be your last update, where we say this is the maximum amount of spending and the maximum tax levy that would be included in the budget. You'll have your very first public budget hearing on July 22nd, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see how everything progresses to see how that will actually look. Same thing for August 3rd. That is slated to be in the evening. August 12th is budget adoption. And we will, as we go through, schedule additional budget workshops like the decision package that Tom talked about and anything else you may want to dig into. We'll continue to have these budget reviews available online, and then the recommended budget will be available on the website with our normal opportunity for folks to comment that way. So with that, I know I've thrown a ton of information at you. You're going to get a ton more information from the departments that are presenting today. But is there anything I can answer for now or additional information I can seek out for you? I've worn you down.
Like drinking from a fire hose.
It is. I completely feel you.
Go ahead, John. Yeah, Chairman, thank you. So just want to be sure that one of the last slides on 35, the 8.4 million, that's not shown in the $456 million figure. That would be
Correct.
Okay.
And so those folks will be telling you about those, but you won't see formal presentations on that.
Okay. And then this does show pay pool increases in other years other than.
Right.
Okay. Also, on line number 37, general fund, I understand that 8.2 million in 22 is a 27th pay period, but what's the other shortfall in that year?
So we do have a pay pool that comes into effect that year. And then you can see we have radio replacements in that year, $626,000. And then you have a slightly higher than usual CIP, cash CIP that year, 1.7 million. And so those are some of the drivers that you'll see there.
And so, yeah, I'm sure you talked about the CIP. I was going to ask you about that as well. We based on last year's CIP, there was a lot of forecast in future years. Has that been adjusted as well for this?
So down below is the cash from the 2020 adopted CIP, and so this sheet reflects that action from last August. What you'll see next Tuesday is our tentative recommended CIP, and at that'll look different than this. But we will show you a slide that basically takes into account the impact on the forecast. But since that was the last official action you all had taken and we don't have your approval for what we haven't incorporated into the forecast yet.
Okay, then probably my last question would be, all right, sources of revenue. We're talking, quite a big chunk of our annual budget is state grants for specific services. We have no idea how to guess on that at this point. Are we just making the assumption that those are going to be flat or they'll continue? And
For now, that is the assumption, but I would tell you that we are already seeing in the ComCare Revenue Fund a hit. We know that those revenues are going out. Now, there are, though, some separate opportunities for federal assistance for that for right now, and we are pursuing every one of those as much as we can. And so we are hopeful that there will be opportunities for alternative revenue sources to come in and help shore that up. But that'll be something that I know Tim will talk about when he talks about his ComCare budget requests, and just one of those things we'll have to monitor and figure out if there needs to be some property tax support or a reduction in service.
do you
Or
have an
lobby.
estimate for the fire district specifically? It's kind of separate from this.
We do, and I will be happy to provide that to you separately. Their situation is not as dire. They tend to have more volatility in their assessed value historically, but not as much lately. And they have adequate fund balance for today. And the commission has taken action the last 2 years to allow transfers of excess budget authority into their building fund. So I think they're probably in a decent position for now. Theirs doesn't look quite like the county's general fund.
What about in Trust Bank Arena? We expect some type of obviously they're shut down at the moment. I don't know when that's gonna get back on its feet, but basically it's trying to be self-supportive, but clearly that's not gonna happen for a while, so is that reflected in here somewhere?
It is not. The only thing that's reflected in there is right now, until we know more about whether shows are just gonna cancel for the rest of the year or not, we do continue to have the facility fee match that we had expected going in there. Other than that, the CIP that is included in their 2021 requested budget, excuse me, is what I'll present to you on Friday. And that hasn't been adjusted yet. If the commission asks for that to happen, then certainly we'll go back to them and talk to it. The only thing is, we do have the NCAA tournament coming in 2021, we hope. So, we'll need to take some of that into account as we move
Questions
into
for now?
next year.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions I can address before I turn it over to the sheriff?
Thank you for the introduction.
All right, well, with that then, Sheriff Easter, I will find your budget presentation. Oh, that's the 18th Judicial District, just kidding. Is this you? That's you. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just get out of your way and not create more trouble. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I assure you, Dave washed his hands thoroughly before he handed you that.
3 or 4 times.
She's in the hallway probably. Oh, you're there.
She's getting ready to take her rightful place.
And look, I have signs.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, laugh probably. Do you have a phone
We should use that instead of these.
sign?
Well, good afternoon, Commissioners. I appreciate you having me come here today and talk to you about decision packages that we are proposing. The first several pages here are basically our mission statement, vision statement, core values, what our responsibilities are. And we'll go to page 3 in the slide presentation. This shows our 2020 revised budget, and then what our 2021 requested budget is. You'll notice in the third column on change, you see equipment in 2020 was $335,000. Requested is only $30,000. That's because of radio purchases that have taken place. That's why all that money was there for 2020. The next slide illustrates over the years other than 2019, funding that we had left over that we returned to the county. And then we will get into decision packages. The very first one is for out-of-county inmate housing. As you recall, last year, we had discussed the annex, what our projections were over 3 years' worth of data, that we felt that our out-of-county housing would decrease dramatically. Therefore, in 2019, $1.5 million was taken out of our budget, which I approved of because we felt that with the numbers that we researched, we would be in a good spot. However, 2019 was I hate to say banner year, but that's exactly what it was. Our inmate population never dropped below 1,550, which was well above what we calculated the annex and our main facility to be. And in fact, most of the time it was over 1,600. Therefore, we had to ask for $1 million last year to even pay, to be able to pay our out-of-county housing cost from September on. We're on track to be the same way. Until COVID-19 hit, we were usually setting at about 1,660 number of inmates. It really wasn't fluctuating. It would go up a little bit. It would go down a little bit. But our out-of-county budget authority that we have right now is almost spent, and it's May. However, due to COVID-19, we started seeing a reduction in the jail population from different efforts that the judges and the DA's office did, plus efforts. There's not a lot of proactive efforts that were taking place out in the field with law enforcement agencies because of COVID and making those car stops on general car stops and the face-to-face contact. So we saw a huge decrease in our jail population. Today we are only at 1254. We have brought back all out-of-county inmates. So we have no inmates that are out of county right now. So we're not paying any expense right now. That decision was made about 3 weeks ago to save money, first off. And second off, hopefully, as this goes forward, we will have some other ideas put in place with the judges and the DA's office and the defense attorneys to hopefully start maintaining the jail population a little bit better without compromising safety. So that is our hope. But again, it's not something that we can control. And so we have seen an uptick in bookings this week, and our population has jumped about 20 people, which isn't huge, but we're also starting to get back to normal. And when we get back to full normal, that's when we'll see exactly what's going to go on and if we're going to jump back up to the 1,600 numbers. And if we jump back up to the 1,600 numbers, that's why we're asking for the $1 million in the decision package. I will also tell you, in 2020, if those numbers go back up like that, we'll be in here again asking for money for 2020 because we will be out of money again this year. Any questions on that decision package?
I don't have a question, but I would, is there any way that you could just re-explain to me the system that you have versus the system, just really quickly, like high level, the system that the sheriff's department has versus WPD?
On what?
Well, the information sharing. Do you guys have two separate systems?
We do.
So what is your system and what is their system called?
Our system is iLeads currently.
And what's the contract on that? Do you guys have, did you sign a contract?
With iLeads, it's been out of warranty for 10 years. That's why we're getting a new RMS system.
Okay, so well, I guess my question bases around, if we talk about just overall, looking out in the future, when these contracts come up, is there a possibility for WPD and the sheriff's office to combine systems?
No.
There's never a possibility of that?
There was about 2 years ago.
Okay, so talk to me about that.
We couldn't,
The city and county tried to look at
Yes.
doing that, and the city at the time was leaning towards going with another system. The county was going with this system, and they never got together. So
Is there a possibility in the future that they could get together? What would be that year? We're talking about years out. Is there a possibility of that?
probably
Ever?
10 years from now. The best possibility was 2 years ago, and the decision was made that the city absolutely wanted to go with the system that they were looking at. And that particular system didn't have CAD, which is what you got to have to run 911, and it didn't have a JMS system, so it did not fit our specifications of what we had to have just to operate.
So you use iLeads, what do they use?
E-Justice right now, until they convert over. And then we'll be using Tyler Technologies, and I don't remember the name of what they have.
And if the city wants to use part of the CAD system or whatever, they've got to pay to integrate.
Okay, thank you.
That was a contentious conversation at the time. That's
I
why I
could
was a
tell
little
by
bit,
the
that's
question
why I was
that
a
I-
little bit hesitant to exactly how I was going to answer that.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff, for this. Thanks for the phone call yesterday, just giving us a heads up about what was happening with your medical services and stuff. I do appreciate, you guys included the Good County Partners, where it showed you gave us back roughly $5 million between 2014 and 2018, that you have a history of doing that. And then regarding the jail annex and stuff, what needs to be discussed and remembered, especially with your budget being in place, is you moving out of this courthouse has given us a lot of breathing room for the district attorney and hopefully the courts for the future, which, looking at our long-term CIP, we're probably going to be moving stuff around. That's could potentially save us tens of millions of dollars by just your willingness to do that. And I don't think
appreciate
that
that.
needs to be lost on us as we're talking about your expenses going up a little bit. What you did for us alone on just moving out of here and into there is saving us a lot of money, and like I said, just giving us breathing room. And I know the district attorney is extremely grateful to have more space for his employees, and your willingness on that's been wonderful. So,
I appreciate that, sir.
thank you.
I might also mention, Commissioners, when I mentioned in the opening remarks that most decision packages have been cut except for what we call cost of doing business decision packages, the sheriff has two of the most blatant one of those in his budget. The jail inmate population, which we can't control, and also he's going to get the one in a little bit regarding medical contract increases. Those are costs of doing business that are very challenging to not approve.
And the second one there, in reference to inmate medical, that is tied directly a lot of times to our population. So that's why it fluctuates, unfortunately. So, any other questions on out-of-county housing? Okay. The next one we have is priority 2. That's reoccurring equipment costs. As many of you know, we went and bought the dash cams and the body cams. And the vendor that we used was Axon. It's a great system. It has done a lot for accountability, both from the citizen standpoint and from the deputy standpoint. So a lot of times when we get complaints, we simply get to look at the video and we can determine if it's a legitimate complaint or not. And it also helps with the retrieval of evidence for proving of cases. It assists in a lot of different manners of operation that we do within the sheriff's office. When we purchased those items, again, we were giving back a lot of money. A lot of that was due to the detention area being lacking on personnel. At the time, we had several times through the last 2 or 3 years, we've had 77 openings. And because of the salary savings, we could pay for the camera costs because that's a reoccurring cost every year for maintenance and storage fees. And so the good thing is, just like I've talked before, if we could ever get back to the staffing levels where we need to be, where we'd be cutting overtime, burnout, all those other things, this is the cause and effect part of this, where we can't afford this system at this point. We have another class of 20 starting here at the end of May. We will only have 11 openings. We've been running roughly between 12 and 15 openings for the last year, year and a half, or about the last year, which is a really good thing. But on the backside of it is some of these expenses here that we're paying out of salary savings, we don't have the budget for it. And so we're asking for that to be added to the budget. Any questions on equipment costs? Okay. Next, judicial courtroom security deputies. Well, I'll start off with, and I think a couple of you were here about 3 years ago. We did a study, and the study showed that we needed about 10 deputies up in the judicial division to handle all the hearings. What you probably don't know yet is Mr. Bennett has compiled a bunch of information because of Odyssey, and last year there was 92,000 and some odd hearings. Not that every one of them had to be attended by a deputy. However, we have 23 courtroom deputies. We asked for 4, knowing that the study showed we needed 10, but we asked for 4. We got those 4. And we saw about 6 to 9 months of less overtime being used by everybody else that we have to bring in to guard the courtrooms. And it was leveling out to where we thought the 4 would work. The Supreme Court changed the rules. And now they go by what's called a permanent assignment. So if a judge gets a case assigned to them, that case is with them from that point forward, which means instead of having 4 or 5 judges having hearings at the same time, now we can have 10 to 12 judges having hearings at the same time because they're all assigned to that particular case. And there's thousands of cases that get assigned. The problem with that is that has now changed the way that we can guard courtrooms. And it's changed to the point where we spent 22,300 hours of overtime of other deputies working in those courtrooms to make up for the fact that we didn't have enough personnel to handle all the hearings. So that's why we're asking for the additional deputies to help hopefully solve the problem of what was created with the permanent assignment.
Sheriff, so
Yes.
there was a study that said you needed 10 a couple years ago, and you added 4 last year,
We added 4, I believe it was in 18. No, 17, into 17.
and that held you steady for,
Through 18. Towards the end of 18 is when the Supreme Court came down and changed from central assignment to where one judge assigned out the cases and then the judges handled their own schedule so they'd work around each other, to a permanent assignment, which means once the judge gets the case, he has it until it's finished, which then causes more hearings to take place because they're not able to work around each other anymore on schedules.
okay. And this is really, all these officers are just to assure security during the court case?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks, a lot of the inmates that are inside the facility, they're still under our charge when they come up here for any type of hearing. And you're talking numerous hearings that they can have before they actually go to trial. And then you have some cases where they might be released, but it's a person-type felony crime or it's a gang crime or something like that that requires our attendance in there to protect the courtroom during those particular hearings or trials.
Don't you remember, you used to see that the judge would be on the video and the inmate would be in their orange jumpsuit or whatever, shackled, and it'd be on the news all the time. And now they're actually walking into the courtroom versus before you would just have your normal people in the jail just handle it back there, right?
Well, no, not exactly.
But they wouldn't have to walk over here, right?
Oh, no, they
But
did.
wasn't it digital, or broadcast?
We do have video court, but that's for certain things that cuts down some of that traffic. But any type of hearing,
Right.
those are first appearance. Any type of hearing, though, unless they sign a paperwork saying that they don't want to appear in person, they have to be in the courtroom by law. And so that's how we're getting by with some of the video stuff that we're doing right now, because a lot of these inmates want to get their cases pushed through, and so they're signing off on the paperwork saying, hey, I don't need to be in person, I can do it over video.
Yeah.
Could there be a change in the future where more judges would be willing to do some of these minor type of hearings over video because we have it established? There could be. I know some judges like it, some judges do not. And then there's the validity of the law. We won't know if it actually is possible to do this legally till probably somebody challenges it. And then you get a ruling that, yes, we can do it this way. That's the problem with the courts. There's a lot of stuff here, speedy trial, everything else that's been going on, that they're testing some of this stuff, but it very well could end up in some type of Supreme Court ruling later on down the road because somebody's going to challenge what we did. So I don't ever see the video stuff replacing fully all the hearings,
Good.
and definitely not jury trials and stuff like that. I mean,
Right.
folks have the right to see their accuser, folks have the right to be heard, those type of things. They're going to be in the courtrooms.
Okay.
Anything else on that one?
Nope.
All right. Inmate medical. So we went out to RFP. The staff, along with finance and everybody else worked, and Joe Thomas and his crew worked very diligently on this since last October. We hadn't been out to contract in at least the 8 years I've been here, and previous to that, 2 or 3 years. So it was time to go out and take a look at what's being offered out there. We're very happy with the current vendor we have, which is WellPath. And when the RFP went out, there was only 2 companies that put in for it. And so I cannot talk too much about it because it is still out on RFP. However, one company, the price tag to continue their services was $1.6 million. The other company, we have a lot of questions on whether they can actually fulfill the needs of a jail our size. Thus, there's the quandary. And the other third option that we could possibly exercise, in 2020, we signed a 1-year contract. That was for $192,200. We could ask our current vendor to extend another 1-year contract through 2021 because I personally believe a $1.6 million ask is a whole lot of money in the current situation we're in. And so those are the 3 options that we have. And the only ask I have of you all today is how you would like this to go. So that we can, if the third option is exercised to try to get another 1-year extension, we can start working on that tomorrow.
So this is a long-term contract?
Yeah, it's a 5-year contract with multi-year extensions if we wanted it. 3 or 5 year.
Would your experience,
3 year, yeah.
well, would your experience say that if you could, not with us having the unknown, would your experience say, let me go and negotiate for a year and let's tackle this monster in a year from now, for 5 years?
With the current situation that we're in, and we just don't know budget-wise where the county's gonna be at, you know, I listened to a lot of Lindsay's presentation. I mean, there's just so many what-ifs and a lot of decisions that you guys have to make. I think it would be easier on you all, it would be easier on finance and our financial outlook and the citizens who pay taxes that we do the 1-year extension.
I would agree.
Would be my proposal. Yes, sir.
So
I'm
that's
sorry.
well, yeah.
I'm sorry.
So that's what you prefer, because really, managing your jail is such a difficult, issue anyway, that if you would rather us support you by going 3 years, I think if you're comfortable with 1 year, we can do that, but if you'd prefer 3, I think we'd like to know what if you were in control, what would you prefer?
Yeah, if I was sitting in your shoes, I'd vote for option 3. From my standpoint, we will have the same discussion next year on 1.6 million, and I think you're going to have a lot better idea where you're setting at. Because in the end, we're going to have to do a long-term contract. And will it cost us more money? More than likely, it's going to cost us more money. But we also want the best medical care that we can provide inside the facility for a couple reasons. Lawsuit reasons with our current vendor. We have not been, we've been sued, but we have not lost any lawsuits based on any medical needs. In fact, one just came through today where it was dismissed. So, those are factors of why you go with the best company that can do the job that we need done inside that facility. Because there's a lot of liability when it comes to inmate care.
Lindsay, I'm sorry.
I'm just curious, for the 1.6 million, are they proposing to do something in addition to what they've been doing in the past? Is there adding any type of?
Well, 345,000 of that contract of the one vendor, and again, I can't talk a lot about this because we haven't chose yet, is for community corrections, because our current vendor does community corrections as well, their healthcare. I know a portion of this is for a additional mental health nurse. There's only one, and we absolutely need another one, because they also do the mental health down at community corrections for those kids. And so there's other things in here that add to the cost, like I discussed with everybody yesterday. that we're not necessarily in agreement with, but there is some legitimate cost there, and the reason why it's gone up.
Based on the numbers you gave me, it looks like it's about a 3% increase for that one-year extension. Is
Yes,
something in that
3%
range?
increase.
Considering where we are right now, I think if you can try to negotiate a 1 year or even a 2 year, I think that'd be a better way. This is not the right time to switch horses. I think if we could just get by for a year or two, but I would like to even talk about 2 years, because I think that this isn't gonna be solved in a year from now.
Okay. Yep, I absolutely agree with you. If we can talk them into a 2-year extension, that way they're, through 2020 and through 2021, and know financially where the county is standing at.
I would ask that, maybe not even add any services, just simply get us what they did last year, another year, around the 3% number would be something I think we ought to support, and I'd love to see that come back to us.
If you're all right, I do want to price, if in those contract extensions, we could add a mental health nurse. I mean, it is a huge problem we're having right now, due to the amount of folks that have mental health issues, and our pod can't hold them all, and then because they're doing the stuff for the kids now as well.
Does the nurse travel between the jail
Yes,
and the?
only one.
So one person, 40 hours a week, traveling between the two.
So I will give numbers both ways on that. What the contract would be for an extension for 2 years, if they're agreeable to it, and then also what the additional cost would be for a mental health nurse.
Is that something we could fund that nurse directly outside the contract? Is that something we could talk about?
I don't think so, because all this is, no.
Okay.
I'd have to have Mr. Papoon in here, but that, I don't think we can
Probably
do
not.
that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So what's the cost of the extension again?
$192,200,
And so you're gonna ask for a mental health nurse on top of that?
yes.
Okay.
Which is roughly a little over 100,000,
And you're gonna ask for potentially, what would they do for 2 years?
yes.
I would agree. Okay, thanks. I think you're getting the positive
Anything else on
nods.
that?
Thank you.
Okay,
I support that.
okay.
I think you got a consensus.
Let's see here.
So, in
So roughly, the last slide shows the out-of-county inmate housing at $1 million, reoccurring equipment costs at $310,000, courtroom deputies at $343,000. We can take off the $1.6 million and hopefully replace that with $192,200. Again, we have to talk to the vendor to see if they're willing to do that. So those numbers won't be correct based upon the inmate medical contract increase. But that's what our asks are. Any other questions on?
Jeff, do you have a mental health person today? One mental health?
Yes, we do.
person? So this would be an extra.
A licensed mental health nurse who's an expert in the field. There is other LPNs and stuff that assist her with, the different activities they do with that particular population, but they're not assigned there to be able to identify what the mental health need is, be able to give the proper advice on prescriptions, those type of things. And she meets with the folks on a daily basis, because a lot of times they're changing, they're up, down constantly, and then the new influx of folks coming in. So it's a very, very busy job.
Does that person do video? Do they do video interviews?
Elements.
No, they're all brought up to either to the clinic or, because we also have to guard her at the same time. And so, or she does some things in the gymnasium in our mental health pod with them. But there's no video connection between community corrections, the juvenile portion, and us.
Okay.
And I'm not sure they would, I'm not sure I would even be comfortable with that, because it's that face-to-face contact. She is a expert in this field, does a phenomenal job, and that face-to-face contact, because I've been with her several times, she can get people to calm down fairly quickly when
Yeah.
it's face-to-face.
Yeah, I've heard that between video doesn't work
Yeah.
as well as face-to-face.
It's just not personal.
Or you're endorsing what I'd heard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else,
No,
yes,
I
sir.
heard that.
This last sheet you passed out,
Yeah.
this is if there's a 3% or a 5% cut, or are we getting ready to get?
Yep,
to
I was just getting ready to get into that,
sorry.
sir.
And maybe Sheriff, I think the plan is we're going to try to keep that at a high level, to
Yes.
have the Sheriff just talk very high level of what a potential cut would look like to him, 3 and 5%. So,
Yes. So, the sheet that you have in front of you talks about a 3% cut in our budget. Basically, for us, that's mainly personnel. However, $1 million of that, because it's about $1.8 million that we would have to come up with, $1 million of that would be from the pay freeze. No raises would happen in 2021. We'd cut our training budget by 50%. That is the budget that you approved of last year, the $150,000, that, because we no longer have the asset forfeiture account really to pay for training anymore. So last year you gave us the $150,000 to be able to train the deputies properly. We would cut that by $75,000. We give an X amount of money each year to each deputy to replace equipment, clothing, those type of things. We would cut that by $70,000. And then the rest of the cuts would have to be personnel. And so what we're talking about there is the fiscal associate, the community collaborator that currently is open. And there's other discussions on how we're going to handle the Mental Health Coalition by utilizing a group of people to do a lot of the stuff that the community collaborator was doing, but at a higher level. A property tech, which is down in our property and evidence section, and they're also labeled that way for our clothing, our quartermaster area. So we would cut the position in the quartermaster area, and we'd have to have one of the sergeants or the lieutenant that's out there have to maintain all of our clothing. The office specialist, that would come out of my office. We have an office specialist opening right now that we have not filled up in the administrative section, who's one of the secretaries that works for Dave and I, or Colonel Mattingly and I. We have froze that for right now because of the furloughs, so we did not fill that position, so this would be a cut. And then when you look at what all we are required to do statutorily, and judicial, and what we have to do out in patrol and the detective section, basically our proposal would be to cut any of our proactive units, which would be community policing and community liaison. Community liaison does all of our proactive engagement with kids, teaches all the DARE programs across the county, and then partakes in any of the special events that are going on. They do a lot of our events where we're going out for recruitment. They're the ones that man the booth for that. They do all the proactive stuff. And then, of course, community policing is the proactive aspect of out in the field. But those are not required positions. Those are positions we like to have. They do a lot of proactive work in the community and put on a very good face for the sheriff's office. But the last time this happened in 2012, they cut positions and said, but we're not going to cut services. That's no longer possible. We cut positions in 12. We still don't have some of those positions back. This time here, if we have to cut positions, we're cutting services. And that's what's going to happen.
So what kind of setback do you think that might have? And maybe that's not a question that you can answer right now, but if we do cut the community collaborator, for example, what kind of momentum do we lose? How does that affect all the work that's being done to potentially move our community forward? I mean, I would like to know, if you don't know now, maybe.
No, I think I could answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you're on the board. We have negotiated a contract with WSU, Bothner and Bradley, and then Brenda Dietzman's company to push forward the agenda and the goals and the expectations.
And we were just
of the
awarded a
board.
grant today.
Yes.
So.
And so the money, because the community collaborator position, she transferred. She is now our health and wellness coordinator with the sheriff's office. So we've been operating without the community coordinator on the sheriff's side. What we had discussed is taking that money to pay for this other group at a higher level to push the Mental Health Coalition forward. So the community collaborator cutting from us is really not that big a deal, other than the $50,000 to pay for these other folks to push this thing forward. That's where it becomes a problem.
I guess I just want to know how many years you think it sets us back from the forward progress that we've already made. And I'm not asking for you
Yeah.
to set a date, but I think that's something that we need to think
Yeah,
about.
well, it will hurt us. There's no doubt about it. There is, we've made a lot of headway, until COVID-19 happened, and now we've had to, kind of slow down. Everybody's busy on their own stuff. But sooner or later, that's gonna ramp back up, and that's at the same time, that this conglomerate of folks was gonna come together and start moving forward with all of our plan. So that, we simply act as a board, while they're enacting our plan. Well, that's the $50,000 from the county side that was gonna pay for that.
Well, and I'd just like to point out that the past 2 years, legislative platforms that we have talked about has been mental health related. And so if we have, we've been talking the talk. When we do our budget, we really need to walk the walk when it comes to moving that needle forward.
Mm-hmm. Anything else on the 3% reduction? Do you want me to cover the 5% reduction as well, manager?
Just high level, sure.
Okay. Again, it's simply positions. So you'll see on here where it is a deep cut. We're back to very good operating levels within detention. We would have to cut 8 deputies there. Our PIO position, which handles all of our website, Facebook, Instagram, all of the social media stuff, we would have to cut that as well. The corporal that runs our reentry program, because again, that's not mandated. That is a nicety to have to try to reintegrate inmates back into the community so they're not coming back to jail. We'd have to cut our intel corporal, who is gathering intelligence constantly going on inside the facility, which is on a daily basis. And then our population control corporal, we'd have to cut one of them, one of our sergeants, and then 3 detectives to accomplish a 5% cut of about $3 million. And all of those would be services. Those 3 detectives, they come from the task forces. We'd no longer be involved with DEA, FBI, or ATF as far as a detective position. Because we can't cut detectives we shouldn't be cutting those detectives either, but we cannot cut detectives that are working the cases that victims are reporting on an everyday basis here in Sedgwick County. So the only option we have is to cut out our task force stuff, which is that's a big issue, but that's our proposal.
Fun stuff.
Lori, ready for the next? Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks, Sheriff.
Commissioners, our next presentation will be from the district attorney. We'll be on page 209 of your binders, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Bennett.
We had a really long one. We have half an hour.
Hey, Lindsay, while he's pulling up, so just so I know for the future, I see our budget book, page 125 has these in there. So what we just heard from Jeff, or from Sheriff,
So
is that on top of what's in this book, or is that budgeted in
that would
there?
be on top of what's in your book. The decision packet, there are no decision packages included in these base requests. That would make the budget
On
bigger.
all of these.
Right.
Thanks for the bad news. Mr. Bennett, how are you? Fine, thank you.
Commissioner, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
another long sheet.
You have 90,000 hearings a year?
Settings.
Thank you.
We don't attend every one of them, but there's 90,000 that are set across the full spectrum of what we do.
What's the percentage of the state? I mean, you have to have a substantial percentage.
As a general rule, we do about 25% of all the business in the criminal justice system in the state. So some years it's 22, some years it's 26, but just
It's safe to say a quarter.
about a quarter, one jurisdiction.
Sorry.
Are you gonna talk about where we're at with Odyssey?
Okay. Yeah. I'll give you the update. But in fact, there's some things going on right now today. In
Aaron,
fact,
can you
we've
pull up
had
his presentation for him, pretty please?
10 emails from OJA today, in fact.
It should be on.
I have a letter, I think you've probably seen, of the Assembly files and the OJA.
There's a lot on there.
But I-
Sorry, Aaron, thank you.
Wait a minute, we were getting ready to send it today, but in the last 12 hours, we've gotten a whole bunch of updates, so we're gonna hold off, make sure we've got accurate, I don't wanna send them bad information. We're making progress in some of them, some still not so much.
And you got the impact on the budget for Odyssey in here?
That's a discussion, because the question is, who needs to absorb that exactly? Do I need to ask you guys to give me more people to deal with that, or do I need to say it's a clerk's issue? So we'll talk about that.
Very good.
We waiting on Tom, or we?
No.
Go ahead and get going, okay?
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Tom, you need beer? No. Okay, thank you. Hi, Mark.
Okay, so this is the judicial district, 18th Judicial District, our budget discussion for the 2021 budget development. Obviously, we put this together in anticipation of a normal budget cycle, and so much of this contains information that will be largely informative more than anything else, because I recognize since this was drafted, the world has changed significantly. And so rather than jump right into this, I'm going to start off with the real issue before us, which is, given the COVID crisis and the likely impact on budgets, the first order of business that was given each of the departments was to try to come up with a way to reduce our budgets. And so what we've come up with is a couple of quick scenarios that we could do this without any impact on services provided to the citizens. So my budget, let's see here, 2021 proposed is $12,500,560,000. A 3% reduction would be $376,819, and a 2% reduction would be a little north of $240,000. We had already had money approved and earmarked to replace and update the carpeting in the annex, what we call it, the second floor over there where the DA's office is. Pardon me. Allergies are getting me. That was already earmarked, because if any of you have taken a walk through the DA's office lately, I think we're up to 5 different updates throughout the office. You walk in and it's one piece of carpet, then it's another one, and it looks kind of ridiculous. And actually the wrinkles and the ripples in it and the duct tape, it's kind of holding it all together. We had asked for that maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, but when the discussion of reconfiguring the courthouse and moving the DA's office out came up, let's hold off on that, because I didn't want to spend money on replacing something that maybe somebody else's later, or might actually be raised. That was one of the possibilities, obviously, that was under discussion. About a year ago, it became clear that we're not ready to make those kind of decisions, and in the meantime, I got an office to run, and so it was time we talked to the county maintenance folks and decided it would be appropriate to go ahead and replace that carpet in the short term. That being said, that does not have to happen. And I think, frankly, it'd be a little tin-eared of me to ask you all to go ahead and give me fresh carpet right now when people are out of work and that sort of thing. So right off the bat, that's a big chunk of this. Also, we have salary savings from just the normal turnover. I have 140 staff members, 55 lawyers, 70-plus support staff, and there's just the normal retirements and people moving on, and that sort of thing. And so we always have support, or we always have salary savings. I don't believe we've had less than $200,000 in salary savings at the end of a year, certainly during my tenure. And historically, that's a very attainable goal. And so between the carpet money, we're not going to spend that, we'll give that back, and returning at least $200,000 to the county at the end of the year in salary savings, potentially more. But I'd feel safe in saying 200,000 just because that's an attainable number. That could hit our numbers here for both 2% and 3% reductions, which I think was the ask from the county to try to hit that. So I won't have any trouble meeting that, and I think, again, I can do so without sacrificing services to the citizens, to the victims of crime, to the folks we're supposed to serve. So I wanted to get that kind of on the table to begin with. Since that is the sort of threshold question, what are we going to do to try to reduce our budgetary impact on the county? That's the answer from my perspective. I can discuss it further if necessary. But before I moved on to other things, I wanted to at least address that, because quite frankly, I think that, that's probably it for the budget presentation from the DA's office today. I mean, that's what you need to know, and that's kind of just where we're at. Now, again, if there's no questions on that, I'll transition then with the time I have, and stop me at any point, ask any questions, but I think it's important. I tried to take this approach every year that I made this presentation. That is to not only tell you what the state of affairs is currently, but kind of what I see the big issues on the horizon are for the DA's office. And so this presentation was geared up with that in mind. And so I'll kind of walk you through some of that information if that's all right. Obviously, our mission, you guys know what it is we do in the DA's office. Salary enhancements, there's a formal study that's underway. One thing I will point out is that we have the DA's office has always been, district attorneys' offices in general, nothing specific to Sedgwick County. It's just a place nationally where lawyers, people coming out of law school often go to get trial experience, and then they parlay that into a private career or go into some other sector of law. So having turnover is not unusual. What has been unusual for us in the last 18 months to 2 years is the level of attorneys who we've lost. Not kids coming out of law school, been with us for 2 to 3 to 4 years, but we're talking people with 20-plus years of experience. And yes, there's been one retirement, somebody just no longer practicing law is retiring. But I've lost chief-level people to other jurisdictions. I had 2 chiefs in charge of distinct units within my office who left within the last 6 months, both of whom are going to go make $35,000 and $40,000 more, respectively, in another prosecutor's office in the state of Kansas. And so a salary study, I think, is important, and it's also important, frankly, for my staff attorneys to know we're doing a salary study, if nothing else, that they know we're out, we're asking, and I raise this to you all so that they know I'm not ignoring their needs. But a law degree gives those people an opportunity to leave that maybe not everybody else has. They don't have to work for me. There's other law firms. There's other practice a guy could go do, a gal could go do. Hang your own shingle, for that matter. And so I'm constantly trying to attend to that. The different units within the office, I think most of you, again, are fairly familiar with the type of business we're required to do. So there was a decision package. It's a fancy way of saying these are the asks that I was going to ask for before COVID. Now, I will tell you that 3, 6, 11, 12 additional FTEs is an ask unlike any I had ever brought to you. And frankly, Jeanette's been in her position predating me when Mrs. Folston was the district attorney. And between the two of us, I've been 23 years in the office. Jeanette's been at least here, been longer than that. None of us can remember ever having the nerve to ask for something as big as this. And if you think, well, what is going on that would require you to think you need that many more folks? And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about a little bit. I recognize this is either entirely or very likely completely out of the realm of possibility. I suppose if we open back up in July and everything's, the economy takes a skyrocket back maybe we'll talk again in the fall, but that's probably not gonna happen. So what is it that's going on that would cause me to need this? So I understand Jeff or Easter already mentioned the number of hearings that we have scheduled in the course of a year. I believe you all would have heard about the change in our docketing system, which went into effect now 2 years ago in June. We used to have what's called a central assignment, a system where you would go to a single judge and then he'd assign it to whichever judges were available. Now it goes to a linear, sort of a silo approach. The minute a case is filed, it goes to Judge A, Judge B, whoever, through the life of that case, which is fine. It's a way of doing things, but it's certainly been a significant change for us. And the way that works in most larger jurisdictions, I talked to folks in Cleveland, for instance, oddly enough, Cleveland proper is not that much bigger than Sedgwick County. In fact, for maybe a hair bigger, Wichita is. Cuyahoga County is huge compared to Sedgwick County. But I talked to them because they have this. They use that same model that we're using now, and the way they are able to do it and effectively do it is they basically outnumber their judges. They got enough lawyers to throw at each individual judge that they can attend to that judge's dockets and that judge's schedule. Well, I have 55 lawyers. I've got 5 or 6 in sync. I've got 3 who do traffic. I've got juvenile offender attorneys. I've got 5 who do appeals. I mean, we're spread fairly thin, and so it's only about 20, 25 who are devoted solely to criminal, which means I got about 2 lawyers per every judge in the criminal division, which is 10 judges. That's not enough for me to be flexible enough for people to do that docket the way it's really intended, the way this new way is going. So what we anticipated was trying to add some more lawyers to try to throw some more numbers at it. And the other is, if you were to ask me, if there's something on here, if things improved enough that you could give me one thing, what would it be? In a vacuum priority, what's listed as priority number 3, actually. These would be support staff, not attorneys, because the idea was we would assign a support staff member to every two judges at a time, so that they could be doing all the administrative tasks associated with each judge, so that the lawyers aren't doing as much of that. One of the things I mentioned earlier was we've lost lawyers, and we've lost good, experienced lawyers to other areas. One of the things I hear is it's kind of a quality of life issue, too. It's not just money, although making more money always is a draw. But it's when you're spending every evening, when you're spending, every weekend working on cases, when it's, you get prepared for a case and then it doesn't go on Monday because it got continued, and meanwhile you've moved everything else so you can try that case, and now instead of getting anything done, you now have 15 cases, none of them which got done. And meanwhile, you're supposed to be in 5 different courtrooms, and we're doing everything we can to make life better, but it's really a quality of life issue. I think that and those 2 of the guys who left, the ones I'm thinking of, they made a lot more money, but they both said, one of them especially said, he's got younger kids, and he's like, they never see me as it is. So I'm not here to set a sob story for anybody. They're high, very well paid attorneys in the grand scheme of things. They have a consistent paycheck and a good place to work, and it's a good place to work. But the scope and the amount of work we cover and are expected to be on top of is candidly fairly staggering. And so that's why we are asking for more lawyers. And if you add more lawyers, you need support staff to support the efforts that those lawyers are doing. So that's why we came up with priority number 2, which is the admin assists. And then the docket assistance would be something new, trying to alleviate some of the pressure on our lawyers having to attend to all of these hearings and be in all these courtrooms. The appellate division, I've told Boyd Isherwood, our chief of our appellate division, I said, let me know. He's told me for about 3 years that he is getting close to needing somebody, and we've held off asking until this year. But the volume is such in our appellate world. Every case can be appealed that goes through our system. And there's only 5 of them right now handling, we file 3,700 cases a year. Not everything gets an appeal that deserves a response and a docketed response from that we need to give to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. But he's at the point where he needs some extra help. And then finally, the expert witness fees. We don't really have a line item for expert witnesses, but whenever, if we had to hire an outside assistant, a psychologist usually is what it is. Coroners, they're working at the Forensic Science Center, so that's not a problem. But psychologists, psychiatrists, typically, that's where the expense comes. And I felt like we needed to at least put that on the ask so we could have a little extra money for those kinds of things. So those were the asks that we were going to make this year. You can see the budget request and the impact. Again, this is largely moot at this point, given what's happened, but I at least wanted to run through this briefly. One other thing you probably need to be aware of is crime trends. I didn't catch all of what Sheriff Easter said, but you probably need to be aware that what the crime trends are showing and the impact on the hearings. Again, 90,000 hearing types scheduled in Sedgwick County that my office is required to at least attend to. That does not mean there were 90,000 separate court hearings, but they were scheduled. And so some human being in my office needs to look at that and go, is that going? Do we need to put an attorney in the room? Do we need to have witnesses here, yes or no? Even if it's a 30-second analysis, it adds up. And most of those are not 30-second analysis. So pending homicides, when this, so 2014, I believe it was, the Supreme Court of the United States came up with a new decision which talked about the penalties. We used to have what's called a hard 40, hard 50 in Kansas, and we could ask for an increased sentence. The penalty for first-degree murder was 25 to life for a very, very long time. When that decision came down, it said you can't do that unless you put that in front of a jury. I'm not going to get in the weeds on it. It's not all that interesting, and certainly not at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a day you've already listened to budgets all day. But
Oh, keep going.
oh yeah, I'm sure you're riveted. Yeah, the Twitter feed, I'm sure, is just exploding with big hearts coming up out of the screen, right? But this legislature, we went to the legislature, and Derek Schmidt actually asked, and at the time Governor Brownback asked the legislature to go into a special session in the fall, and they made a change that would allow us to get that accomplished. Okay. The very next session, though, the legislature said, let's do a rethink on this. I think what we just need to do is make it default. And so the default now is 50 to life is for all homicides. And there's another little special rule that even means if your criminal history is at a certain level, essentially you get an increased penalty as well. All that means is it's a tough sell for a defense attorney to tell a guy, yeah, you need to go ahead and plead guilty to, and the only default is you're going to get 50 to life. Well, can we plead to an on-the-grid offense? Yes, see, there's this extra special rule that says you still do 600 plus months if you got bad history. And most of the folks doing these crimes have plenty of history. And so the stakes are so high, I'm attributing some of this to that it's getting harder and harder to get murder trials to go into court, which at the end of the day, it's 90 cases, that we have pending right now. When we file 3,700 in the course of a year, but still 90 murders. At one level or another that are pending at a given time. We never had more than 50 in my career in this office pending at a given time, and so that's a concern. I've got 3 or 4 lawyers who are covering more than 10 murders themselves. I've got 9 assigned to me just because I'm trying to help out. It's a lot of work. You can see the the primary hearing schedules. We have them all broken down to get us to those numbers that we told you about earlier. Just in criminal alone, we're talking, we went from 29,000 hearings set on the prelims, jury trials, bench trials, sentencings, PVs, and arraignments. 29,000 in 2014. We're up to 33,700 this last year, just in the criminal department alone. That's, a third of those 90,000 hearings are in one place. Criminal cases, types of hearings scheduled. Let's see here. See in 2019, you can just see the trend. Total crime index, we had a good year in 2014. And then things have since then gone exponentially higher. you know, obviously a graph like this, you could pull way back and make it look a lot smaller, but I think getting more granular like this helps you get a better snapshot of what's going on in our community. The million-dollar question is, okay, what's going on then? Why are we seeing increases in drive-by shootings? Why are we seeing increases in violent crime? I hate to beat the same old drum over and over again, but the only thing I can see differently on our dockets and our cases, et cetera, over the last 5 years that did not exist to the degree to which it does now is the prevalence of methamphetamine in our community. You know, you've heard me say it over and over again. I was talking, we had our 19th murder last week, and I was talking to one of the detectives on the street, or one of the sergeants, excuse me, and I don't want to say something, you know, that makes the headlines and make a promise I couldn't quite deliver, but just going through it in my head, I could not think of a case, a homicide case, that we've reviewed since the beginning of the year that didn't have one party at least, sometimes more, sometimes everybody, but at least one party who wasn't known to abuse methamphetamine, meaning had a history of it in their criminal history, or was not actively involved in it that night. People are not just naturally running around shooting each other. There's going to be some trigger, and what is it? That seems to be it. So I did catch the tail end of Sheriff Easter's presentation, and I heard the question that Commissioner Cruz asked him about not losing the momentum we've started to gain from the mental health drug coalition. I will tell you that I'm also the chair of the Reform Commission for the state, and our requests, our asks to the legislature have mirrored in many ways Sedgwick County's legislative agenda. We've asked for mental health, drug treatment, et cetera, legislation, things designed to embolden and enhance and make more robust those efforts. And obviously, everything's up in the air, but right before the legislature went out of session, some of you may have watched that Senate hearing that took place in the Senate, where everything was just happening on the fly there on the Senate floor because they were trying to wrap up to get the session at least temporarily concluded. There's still some notion, I guess, that they're going to try to open back up, last I heard, for a week to do some final business. But the budget that was approved, at least at that time, included beds, 200, I think, plus 240, I think is the number that comes to mind, mental health, and I don't know if it's drug beds as well, but mental health beds in one of the penitentiaries, reconditioning one of the wings in. I think it was Lansing, but I could be wrong about that. But it was coming out of DOC's budget. Again, I just thought of that as I'm standing here. I would have come more prepared. But my point is, we collectively, Sedgwick County, the state, this information is hard to ignore. And so the policymakers at all levels have been listening. And so between the work of the Reform Commission in Topeka, the Mental Health Coalition in Sedgwick County, and others, we're starting to see some momentum. If they could really get a 200+ bed facility, for people with drug and mental health issues in the penitentiary system, to transition them out back to the community, I mean, what kind of a tremendous impact would that have on improving recidivism rates and improving people's ability to, reconnect and get back into the community in a more safe frame of mind, at least. So now, whether any of this will be able to happen now because of budgetary constraints remains to be seen. I'll go through a few more of these, but you get the gist. Property crimes is no different than violent crimes. There's an increase. The property crime rate is down from where it was in 2007, so I suppose that's a good thing, but we are inching our way back up from the low we had in 2014. Violent crime offenses, Sedgwick County, probably the most unsettling graph in the whole presentation here. We're talking, an exponentially higher than it's been in the last 13 years. Another way of looking at the same basic information. You see the 5-year crime comparison from 14 to 18. 18, the last year that all the information was available from the Sentencing Commission. that typically they would have released 2019 here sometime in the last 30 days, but I haven't seen it yet. I think everything's on hold. Crime Commission typically, Sentencing Commission, excuse me, typically releases their yearly reports in March, April, so sometimes, yeah, somewhere in that range. But that's what you've got, at least as of the last available information. Charged offenses, number of defendants. That's one other thing. And again, maybe that speaks to the methamphetamine, but the number of people involved in the number of homicides there. With 44 homicides last year, but 59 people charged associated with those. People are, working in concert with one another. Again, I think largely in these drug-fueled associations. Drug cases. That's a little higher, I would say, on average nationally and statewide. 15% of cases are typically considered drug-specific cases. So to be at 25% is, maybe it's an overstatement because it's any case that with at least one drug charge. So 15% is probably more cases that are exclusively drug cases. Methamphetamine, though, here, again, you've seen this before, but it's, I think I sent this around. I know Commissioner Cruz responded when she saw it. I had come up here the last couple of years and given you a snapshot 1 year at a time. On this day, we had X number of cases that were that had at least one kind of methamphetamine a part of it. And rather than give you snapshots, I thought it's important to give an actual year-to-year comparison. And so 16.64% of our cases last year had at least one count of methamphetamine charged. And, yeah, and looking back from 2016, 17, 18, 19, you can see the number of meth cases. And it's just really it's a big uptick. So lots more meth cases than we had even in the recent past. I'm going to try to sense the temperature of the room here and not just beat this into the ground much longer. Obviously, you've got access to all this information if there's anything you need to know. Sync petitions, one thing I would say in 2019, we filed 650. I've always considered child needed care cases. I haven't done them in years, but I did handle all of them when I was working in Junction City for several years for Geary County and before I came back to Wichita. And then I've obviously paid close attention to them since I've been down here. I think child needed care petitions are, to some extent, the canary in the coal mine for a community, any community. What's going on with the kids is a good example. It may be a snapshot of what's going on in the homes. If kids are being injured, abused, etc., that is a telling statement about the health of a community, and that there are people suffering out there. And I don't think most folks in their right mind and without incredible stressors would be inclined to sexually and physically abuse and neglect their kids. But the fact that we had to file 650 cases last year, that's not 650 kids, that's 650 cases, is a sad commentary. Plus, you do need to understand, too, there's a whole lot of screening that goes into that decision. We work with DCF, we work with law enforcement, we try to find alternatives to filing child needed care petitions to take kids, putting them into foster care, etc. If there's another way around it, that we can ensure the safety. So if we file that case, a lot of thought goes into that. We don't just knee-jerk that. So that's 650 cases that I'll say we had to file. Yes, ma'am.
Can you help me understand, so this petitions filed correlates to this hearing type over here, and there's only, the child in need of care evidentiary hearings was 7, and then the secure care was 68. So how does this 650 number match with the 75? Or help me understand how these two go together.
Can I speak to that?
Sure, Jeanette.
About halfway in the middle, there's a tab that says child in need of care. It's about the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column.
There we go.
Yeah, that's where I'm getting the 75 number from.
Okay, as you go down that column, all of those cases under the child in need of care were scheduled in a child in need of care hearing.
Okay.
They just
Okay.
have different descriptions.
Okay.
Okay. So when you follow that down, 7,971 cases.
Okay, help me out. Can you just show me? I would love for you to just show me, yes, okay.
Child in need of care.
Oh, all of these, oh my gosh,
submitted.
yes, sorry,
Okay.
goodness gracious.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank God for that
Yep.
clarification.
So
Thank
along
you.
the top, adult diversion,
Yep,
asset,
I see
yeah,
it
there you
now.
go. So,
Okay,
so
thank you.
sync, it's 7,900 cases, 7,900 hearings, I guess is, yeah.
So out of the 650 that were filed,
It's 7,971
Good night.
hearings set.
It would be of any case, some of them are in the system for years.
Yeah.
So it could be a hearing from 4 years, a case about 4 years ago.
Yeah, so we have what's called annual reviews, and sometimes judges do them as often as twice a year. A child that's been in foster care, not been adopted out, the judge will still bring them back. You know, the situation's over with. There was a case when I was in Junction City, again, I'll just use personal experience. It was a famous case in the area back then. The father had murdered the mother. So she's gone, he's in prison, the child's in child needed care because there was no one to take care of him. They were unable to get him adopted. He was about 11 or 12 at the time of the homicide. And so, you know, people aren't adopting kids in their teens as much as they would a much younger child. So on every year, we'd bring him back and tell him, you know, how's it going? Encourage him. He was staying with a foster family who was trying to raise him. And on his 18th birthday, we brought him back and said, good luck. That was it. I mean, age out of the system, and now he's on it, and they was on into his own. So even those hearings take place, even if it's not one of the 650 we filed last year. These 7,900 and some odd cases might be, there might be cases as old as, I mean, frankly, it could be up to 18 years of age. Possibly, if having kids brought back, then you would think that a child that was 1 year of age or yet less when their case was filed would have been resolved long ago. But yeah, it's.
I'm sorry to
No, go
interrupt
ahead,
you.
go ahead.
Is this information, can you email this to me?
The chart?
All of this, yeah, has it been emailed? Yeah, I'd love to see this, and then maybe just some time, if we could schedule
Anytime.
outside of this to
Yeah.
go over this again.
And I would speak to the age of those cases. We have some that are even older. They put it back in for some reason. I think oftentimes they are aged out children, but mom has had new kids, and so they're included in the hearing discussions.
Okay.
It goes on for 18 years.
And sadly, there are some generational cyclical things too. We'll have a case, and mom was a child needed care herself, and now she's got kids that are being child needed care, and so.
Wow,
Lots
this
of
is
big-
alarming. Thank you for that
Yeah.
time. I appreciate that.
And if it would help you, I could give you how many cases were included in this hearing count. So.
Maybe, I don't know,
One
this is
case
a
could
lot.
have 5 hearings, one could have 40.
I think,
Okay.
I've always told Jeanette, I think that being as granular as we can about information and statistics is important. I don't want to speak in broad sweeping tones. However, there does come a point at which it's so specific and so much detail, it can be a little overwhelming, so.
Thank you.
Again, more hearing types here on these slides. So I don't want to, I mean, I can go on and on, but I think you're getting the point. It's a busy office. It's a busy community. So I was making a big ask this year, and I recognize that the timing couldn't have been worse. So, but I'm going to come back at some point, you know, when things settle out a bit, and ask for some more help. I've got to, you know, the thing I can't do is lose more senior level attorneys. You can't just throw anybody in to try a murder case. It takes years to gain the competency to do that and do it effectively. You know, there are 3 primary roles for a prosecutor's office. One is to decide what gets past the front door. What cases do we actually charge? We reviewed 9,000 cases last year. We filed 3,700 adult criminal. We filed another 1,000 juvenile. So that means over half the cases that came to the door, we were reviewing to determine whether or not they really needed to be filed. That gatekeeper function. The second is to go then deal with that case, whether it's a criminal case that we try or a child needed care case that we take in front of the judge or whatever. And then the final one, though, and this is one that gets lost, I think people forget about, is we're going to sustain it on appeal. But we have to do the job professionally to the highest level of the law, so that when the appellate review takes place, we don't lose the case and all of the effort have been for naught. So That's why, I'm asking for help for my attorneys, for my staff, so we don't overwhelm people. Money is important, but also having a place where you can go and feel like you're making a difference. People don't do this job for, I always joke, it's the low stress, the high pay, and all the friends you make. That's that's the mantra of the DA's office. The cynicism's pretty thick there. Or the cynicism, how about, let's just say the sarcasm's pretty thick there. Hopefully we're not too cynical. But when the volume is such that that people don't feel like they can continue to meet the demands, that's when I start to lose folks. So, Jim, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. I know that the addition at the jail entrance is about to be completed here, and I know that's going to eventually impact you here in the courthouse.
Yeah.
Can you please talk about, we haven't talked to you in a little while, can you anticipate, if you will, how much relief that's going to give to your office? I mean, a few years ago, you were talking about stacked to the ceiling. I think you still are, but.
Still am. I couldn't have asked for what I was asking for if not anticipating that we'd get some relief. I wouldn't have places for all those 12 people that I was asking for. Literally, I mean, I could have squeezed in maybe one more, two more if I put them in cubicles. So, yeah, it will give us some help. We're going to be able to move some folks out and offer some relief. And frankly, the goal is to start reorganizing how you organize the office. I mean, this last weekend I tried to clean my garage. Why? Because I'm trying to free up space in the basement. Well, I gotta have a place to put the stuff in the basement, so I gotta clean up the garage so I can move the stuff from the basement to the garage.
I
mean,
feel that so hard.
Yeah. It's all sort of cyclical. So for us, you gotta see this big picture here. I'm getting a little 70. I try to stay about 35,000 feet. I'm about 70 right now. But that's gonna help us to have that extra space, so then I can offer some relief, so maybe we can get some extra staff in that space to help the overall organization.
Mr. Manager, I assume that our plan to remodel space for DA Bennett that's still in the plan right now for this year.
Yes, sir, it is.
Do we have a date when that's supposed to be, where you can start using that space?
I think there was I got to see some fingers pointing around here. I just know that once Jeff's facility is done, we've been told, 3 to 4 months-ish. I think maybe a little more than that even, Jeanette's saying.
Yeah, I'd have to bring Tanya in to get the closest
Next plan is to be
estimate.
ready to move in August.
Okay, sooner than that then, so.
You also had talked about the body cams for Wichita primarily, and I know we've added some sheriff stuff in there as well now. Are you able to keep up with that with the staff you have now?
Yeah, I mean, we've figured out a process. We've hired, had two, then now one, criminal justice professor from one of the local colleges who have, enough experience to be able to do that. We've used those positions that the county commission gave us and filled them with those folks, and then we've been able to ask our lawyers, prioritize, please. What do you want them to look at? It's a challenge, yes, and I'm, but so far we've been able to meet it. That's not part of my FTEs, and so let's put it this way: I try to take the temperature of the office by talking to chiefs. My office set DA deputies, chiefs. Chiefs think of them as unit. If in a military setting, it'd be a company commander. I rely on them to tell me what sort of stressors are there people going through, and so far, we've been able to meet that challenge with that. And it really is pretty handy. What we do is they'll send us back, here's what you're looking for, and here's the location within the contact. Look at minute 17 to minute 32. That's where the really interesting stuff are. So then the attorney can focus in and not have to watch hours upon hours of video. So
I know
yes.
this is just a little bitty thing on your budget, but I am curious about the intern program. You show that budgeted for 21. Is that something that's
Yeah, so
up
what
for
that is.
discussion?
Yeah, and what we do is we bring in, we hire as many as 5 interns for the summer. Law students in their second year have just finished their second year. So that by Supreme Court rule, they can actually get a temporary license. And then we put them into our traffic division to help for usually, I'd say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 weeks. Okay, I was trying to think 8 to 9 weeks, but it's 11 weeks actually. It's good to be a college student. I guess you get a big, long summer. But 11 weeks, and then they're in traffic. And I'll tell you what we use it for, frankly, it's our AAA. If I've seen somebody work with us for 11 weeks, we've got a good idea whether or not there's somebody who we'd want to hire. And we've done a show of hands over the years, how many of our current attorneys ran through our internship program And it's, you know, it's been very beneficial to us over the years. Now, I will tell you, a couple of years ago, we only hired 3, I think, because we couldn't, everybody's looking for the same kids and say, two this summer is all we've been able to hire. Because we pay them, I think, a nice salary, but the law firms and the, you know, others can pay more. And so, that's why we have kept it for all these years. But I guess we've got 2 hired this summer, so.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions from anybody?
Nope.
Well, again, I appreciate it. I know I've used up a lot more of my time than necessary, but I could have just stood up and told you how we're gonna save 3% and walked away, but I think you do need to know, you know, it's a big component of the county, so, thank you all.
Thanks for what you do.
Take care.
Take a 3-minute, 5-minute break. Thanks, Mark.
Scott's on the phone or?
go.
Okay.
And Tony, we're live, right? Yes, we are. I think he's ready when we are.
Okay, we're back live. Just a message for the public. We understand that the microphones were hot at the beginning of this video, and some of us commissioners' comments were picked up. Please know that we take our jobs as a Board of Health seriously, and we're working to balance this pandemic with the rest of the county business. This is a stressful time for everyone, and the commissioners are not immune to it. I'll add that helping our community battle this COVID-19 pandemic is truly a high, if not the highest, immediate priority, often requiring evening and weekend many hours by this commission. We apologize for the mics being hot earlier, and we will do better in the future. Thank you. Okay. Next up.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Wadle, the Interim Director of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Department. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present on the 2021 budget. So the mission of the Planning Department is to provide professional planning services and zoning enforcement through implementation of the Community Investments Plan and its tools regarding zoning, land use, community facilities, and infrastructure. And there's a variety of services that we provide in order to help accomplish that mission. We'll talk a little bit more about those in depth in a bit. The MAPD is formed and funded through an interlocal agreement between the city and the county. The funding is split 50-50 between the city and the county and is offset by fees for applications and permits that are processed by the department. The county also provides a reimbursement for the zoning enforcement duties, which are carried out by the planning department. And you'll see it show up in your budget as a contractual payment because it is sharing that cost through the interlocal agreement. Some of the challenges to talk about briefly in 2020 and leading into 2021 is staffing. 25% of the planning department positions will be vacant in 2020. That is with 3 retirements and 1 resignation, 2 of those being very senior positions of the department director and the planning manager. And to provide some context for this and why it's important is that from 2014 to 2019, we've seen a 20% increase in the number of cases that are processed by the planning department and a 30% reduction in staffing, and that is assuming that all positions currently available would be filled. So the 2021 request is for property tax funding in order to carry out the following functions of the planning department. Zoning administration, which promotes economic growth through timely processing of zoning applications, assisting developers and stakeholders with planning processes. Likewise, the subdivision processes and the comprehensive plan, developing and implementing the plan, monitoring it, updating it as needed. Customer service, assisting people to understand the planning process and to assist stakeholders to provide comments and go through that process. Area and neighborhood planning, developing small area plans, developing, updating, monitoring them. And a very small part of what we do is historic preservation, promoting and processing historic preservation applications, assisting developers and stakeholders with planning processes. And last but not least, administration, which includes what you would expect, and emphasizing also that we provide support to elected officials, appointed officials, and the management staff. So to the numbers, the 2021 budget request is flat from 2020. And the caveat to that is that the city and the county will continue negotiating a budgetary adjustment. This takes place every year. In this case, it would be for employee benefits and salaries. I'm told that the city is working on those calculations right now for the pension and such, and expect this to be less than 2% of what the budget is. I was asked also to prepare a 3% reduction scenario. Under that scenario, we would see the reduction from 659,000 approximately to approximately 639,000. The city is also looking at scenarios for budget reductions, but they are looking at theirs for the year 2020. And so one way to accomplish both the scenario for the county and the scenario for the city would be to make the 3% reduction effective in 2020. And then the request would be to keep that funding level flat going in through 2021. A few things to be aware of with the 3% budget reduction scenario is that with the interlocal agreement, the funding is matched between the city and the county, so a 3% reduction, which equals almost $20,000 on the county side, would be matched at the city side, which would result in a $40,000 reduction to the department funding. Again, the city is looking at reductions in 2020, and that the reductions could be satisfied through savings from open positions at this time, but carrying that forward long-term, if that goes long-term, could reduce capacity and create quality challenges in terms of staff being able to process cases and assist with customer service. And that's all I've got for today. Stand for any questions.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations on your position, by the way.
Thank you.
I know I've worked with you in the past, and you'll do a great job. So I hope you have the support and the guidance to do that.
Well, thank you very much.
So your budget is to just have a reduction of 3%? Is that what you're telling us?
The 2021 request would actually be to keep it flat and to accommodate that adjustment for employee benefits and salaries.
Okay.
We were asked to prepare a 3% reduction scenario, so I did that as well.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to clarify, Fund 110 is property tax funds, is that correct?
Right, that's the general fund.
Okay, so this doesn't really show the total budget that's fee funded from the office.
Correct.
Do we
That's all
have
on
that
the
data
city
somewhere?
side. We can get it for you.
I think we ought to see that as well. So the 3% is only reduction in the property tax funds, and we know that I think on an earlier presentation today, you did talk about, on your long sheet, you did show a reduction, I assume because of reduced activity at the office. So they do a rebalancing of their fees periodically to make sure that they're targeting, if you will, a certain fund balance in their own budget.
So that was MABCD.
Oh,
And
that's
so
right.
I think Scott is speaking to MAPD, and I am sorry, but I am not aware enough of how your fee structure works if you guys go through and do some adjustments to that. So if you'd be willing to speak to that, I think that'd be great.
And I can't speak to it in depth, but what I am knowledgeable about is that it does happen, but it's very infrequent. And I don't know that it's so much about the fund balance as much as it is looking at what revenues are collected from the fees and how they offset the support from the city and the county. But again, I don't think it's looked at as frequently as MABCD, and I think it's been a little while.
Well, just a thought, if there is a shortfall to the office, I don't know if we can even do that or not. It seems like it'd be reasonable to maybe do that a little bit more often in the next year or two, just because ideally, this is a self-supported office. Fees take care of things mostly, so just a thought.
We can work with Scott after this presentation, try and assemble some information. I know we have some historical data we've presented, and so maybe we can get a refresh on that
Thank you.
and bring it back.
And I guess what I could add, though, is I do have a page from what the city has worked up so far, and the fees bring in just under $300,000, about $280,000. I'm sorry, I correct that. In 2020, it's $268,000, whereas the city and the county portions are both $659,000. So that's just to give you a kind of a magnitude of scale.
All right. Yeah, Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you. In our budget book, it shows in 2019, you had other revenue of $91,492. What is that from?
So Commissioner, that's basically every year, and he's spoken about the turnover that they've had in MAPD, and so if our full amount isn't spent, we get that back as a refund the following year.
Okay, but don't you charge for zoning and plating applications and so forth?
We do. Yes, sir. That's actually what makes up the $268,000 is charges for services. And
Where's that in our budget book?
That's not in ours because it's a contractual agreement we have with the city where the city is the managing partner. So the revenue, those types of charges for service will show up on the city's budget, not on ours. Likewise, MABCD, because we're the managing partner, all the revenues will show up on our side for our services and not necessarily in the city's budget, if that makes sense. We're basically paying them to manage the operation.
So the city gets all of the income from that?
Yes, sir.
And that income is used to offset the support from both the city and the county.
But in MABCD, we don't keep all that.
Well, they bill us on a quarterly basis, and we remit whatever their actual expenses were out of the revenues that we collect. And so for them, it would show up as a governmental revenue, because Sedgwick County is paying them to offset their expenses. And so it wouldn't necessarily show in their budget that it's a charge for service for their revenues on that MABCD side, if that makes sense. And maybe we can put together some illustrations, I think, because that'll make it a little clearer if we can show the contrast between city and county budgets for MABCD and MAPD to maybe clarify, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Scott, I know that there's been turnover with staff. You've also got turnover with the planning commission membership as well, so, and I know that you've got a couple of, at least a handful of large opportunities for people to, in planning that can be licensed and get the help do that part to get our community going again. So I urge that you and the new commission are able to help deliver some growth back to this community. So I wish you luck and thank you for what you do.
Thank you, sir. We'll be working with them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, I was going to note that I will send out all the presentations electronically for you after we are done today. And then we have one more presentation today, the District Court on page 223 of your binders. And I believe Ellen House is here to present.
I saw Jeff Deering too.
I don't see Ellen. Mr. Judge? Yep.
Thanks.
That's nice. Well, Commissioner Howell, we
Thank you,
really have
Commissioner.
switched roles, haven't we?
Do you send it to us?
Here, you'll give me all mine. Thank you so much. Thank you.
With this? District Court. Very good. Excuse me.
Good afternoon. Are we ready to go?
Yes, thank you.
This is the presentation for the 18th Judicial District Court, Court Trustee, and ADSAP Fund. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thanks. The mission of the District Court is to provide fair and just services in a courteous and timely manner. The 18th Judicial District is one of 31 districts in the state. We are comprised only of Sedgwick County, and we have 28 elected district judges, 2 appointed administrative hearing officers, and 1 FTE judge pro tem. So we have a total of 31 judicial officers. In today's presentation, we're going to talk about the District Court General Fund, which is funded by tax dollars. We're going to talk about the Court Trustee, which is non-tax, and also the ADSAP Fund, which is non-tax. As you know, the district courts are the trial courts in Kansas. Created by the Kansas Constitution, we cover civil, criminal, and provide justice to a variety of people in many, many ways, such as a right to a fair trial in criminal, juvenile, misdemeanors, felonies, and appellate jurisdiction for municipal courts. We handle divorce and domestic relations cases. We handle civil cases, probate, estates, guardianships, conservatorships, care for the mentally ill. In those cases, child in need of care matters, protection from abuse and protection from stalking, issue of marriage licenses, and formalizing adoptions. Now, I understand there was a question this morning about how we're doing marriage licenses right now. And after this started, the COVID thing started where we had to close the courts to the public. The Supreme Court developed a method by which people can apply for those electronically now, and it goes back and forth between the person and the clerk. It may take a little bit longer, but it's being able to be done without having to have person-to-person contact. The general fund budget request for 2021 is a total of $3,542,618. That is a 2.9% decrease from our 2020 revised budget. And the reason that is a decrease is, if you remember last year, you approved some supplemental requests for us to purchase some items that we needed to purchase, mainly for the new case management system that's coming from the state. Now, the Office of the Court Trustee, per statute, they are court employees, state employees that follow the Kansas court personnel rules, but their pay is set by the chief judge and the benefits are provided through the county. The court trustee's office reimburses Sedgwick County almost $300,000 a year in administrative charges, and the trustee's office is divided into two areas. There's the 4D DCF contract. July 1st, we'll see the start of year 8 of a 10-year contract. There's 57 employees in the office with an active caseload of over 23,000 cases. They also collect over $40 million for the children of Kansas. This is where the 2 full-time administrative hearing officers come in. They hear all of those cases, and there are no general fund tax dollars used, as it's 100% self-supporting program through the contract revenue and cash reserves. The other part of the trustee's office is the non-4D office. These are people who do not have state involvement in their case, but by local rule, these cases are referred to the non-4D office, and there are 11 employees in this office that have an active caseload of approximately 6,500 cases, and they collect over $38 million a year. And again, there are no general fund tax dollars used for this program, as it's 100% self-supporting through the user fees. Overall, the Office of the Court Trustee, the 2021 budget request is $6,565,890, and that's a reduction of 4.5%. The reason there's a reduction in that area is because in 2020 we budgeted to purchase some computer programming that is a one-time cost. The final budget for the district court is the ADSAP, Alcohol and Safety Action Program. I have to talk about this one every year because by statute we still have to be able to collect money, even though currently all DUI cases pay the providers directly now, but we still have to have a method to collect funds. So it's always about $7,500 a year. Overall, our budget request is $10,116,008, which is a reduction of 3.2%. We also were asked to look at what 3% and 5% reduction would look like. A 3% reduction for us is a little over $106,000. You can see that I've listed a few items. I just simply went through our budget and looked at what we could possibly cut. And I mean, I'm into things like cutting dry cleaning of judges' robes, trying to reduce office supplies, not buying frames for retirement certificates, not buying teddy bears for the adoption kids, that sort of thing, because when you look at the district court tax budget, over 75% of it is statutorily required funds. Those are your jury fees, your attorney fees, witness fees, that sort of thing. And so the very last page shows of the 24.8% that's left of our budget, we have things like our cell phone allowances are 0.17%, or our drug testing supplies are 0.75%. We just don't have that much discretionary funds. So while it may look like some of the items look like they're kind of silly as far as what I put in our 3%, those are the things that if we had to cut, that's probably what we could cut. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
I don't really have any questions, but I just want to thank you for wearing a mask today, which is hot, right? And
It is.
not very comfortable. I also noticed on the little district court logo, I just noticed that. So thank you for
I
that.
always try to add a little humor.
We need that.
Ellen, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I think 2 or 3 years ago, you all did the incremental increases for fees for attorneys.
Yep.
And I know we did that to match other folks. Are any of those other folks reducing fees? Is that, I mean, an option, or if not, I guess what would be the ramifications?
At this point, they haven't reduced fees. In fact, they've increased them since we raised ours to match them. I've heard of no reductions so far. But I know the legislature hasn't come back and told people how much they have to cut either, so.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? All right, I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Judge, anything to add? Okay.
Okay, Commissioners, that was our last presentation of the day. We do have some time scheduled for discussion. If you have any questions or there's anything you'd like to talk about.
Well, I think it was, I'm not sure how you chose the order for the presentations, but it was good. Obviously, the sheriff and the DA's office is an important part. They're all important, but those two are really important for our public. And so thank you for allowing us to have those first off the bat. So, I don't know, Commissioners, you guys have any thoughts from first glance? I think for Lacey and I, it's the second time we get to go through this, so I'm better off this time than I was last time, that's for sure. So,
I just want to say thank you to those that presented today. I know that I have 2015 to reflect upon, and we didn't have a manager that year, and we had a shortfall to figure out, and it was very painful. And what I've seen so far is the agency leaders are coming in with a willingness to understand what the reality of the situation we're in right now. And they're presenting, if you will, almost a solution-ready proposal for us to adopt. It's been refreshing to see a different tenor, if you will, this year versus 2015 so far. So I want to say thank you to all those that presented today.
Commissioner Dennis, anything? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Not today.
And Commissioner Cruz?
I have nothing.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, and we will continue. When do we start again tomorrow?
1 o'clock tomorrow.
1 o'clock.
I'll try and have treats, but no promises.
That's all right. Okay.
You look good up there, Lindsay.
No, sir, I'm off of this bench as soon as you let me.
Does
These
anybody
lights
need
are
this room
intense.
tonight? Can we leave our stuff here on the table? Normally we leave our stuff on the bench.
You can leave it.
Leave it here? Okay.
Okay. We'll leave it.
Let's keep our chairs tomorrow.
Start again tomorrow. Okay. Thanks, everybody.